Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're kicking things off with a quote, really the philosophical bedrock for, well, any genuine scientific work, especially when science meets politics. It's Karl Popper, and the GPE authors cited it. Only the refutable is scientific.
That really throws down the gauntlet, doesn't it? It means any serious claim, any finding, it has to be open to criticism, to being refuted.
Right. You can't just publish something, especially about politics, and then shut down the debate.
Exactly. If you do that, you're sort of failing the scientific test from the get-go.
And that perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive today. We're looking at this quite extraordinary clarification document from GPE Cameroon, that's Economic Policy Management Training Program at the University of Yaoundé II.
Yeah, following their recent, and let's be honest, pretty controversial economic evaluation of the programs of candidates for the 2025 presidential election.
So what's key here, what we want to unpack, is how they responded.
Well, what's impressive is that they're not just defending it defensively. They're saying explicitly, we welcome the criticism, the observations, because they see this as a long-term scientific project that needs refining.
Okay, so our mission today is really digging into how an academic body tries to keep its scientific footing while navigating the sheer heat of a national political campaign. Let's start with the big picture then. What was the GPE actually trying to achieve with this whole evaluation in the first place?
Well, they outlined this dual objective, and it wasn't just about 2025. It was meant to be longer term.
Okay.
First, help you, the citizen, get a better handle on the actual offers, structure your thinking and your choice.
Makes sense.
And second, maybe even more ambitious, push the political parties themselves towards, well, more rigor, more coherence, making them really cost things out, bring in actual expertise.
So this isn't just about scoring this election cycle. It's about building a sort of template for the future.
Precisely. They want this to become standard practice. For presidential elections, yes, but also legislative, regional, and eventually, they hope, in other African countries too.
Wow. So this Cameroon evaluation is like the first step in a much larger academic project.
That's the idea. A long-term investment in democratic rigor, you could say.
Okay, let's shift focus then to the methodology. Because when the report landed, some of the first hits weren't even about the findings, but just how it was done.
Right, the nuts and bolts.
First off, the length. Almost 100 pages. Someone actually complained, basically saying, who has time for this? Can't intellectuals synthesize?
The classic too long, didn't read problem. But the GPE seems to have seen this coming.
How did they respond?
They pointed out they knew it was long, which is exactly why they included an executive summary right at the start, in French and English.
So the synthesis was there for those who wanted it.
Yes, but crucially, they also used that summary to set boundaries, to manage expectations, scientifically speaking.
What sort of boundaries? What did they say?
Basically, scientific humility. They stated up front something like, look, this method isn't going to capture every single nuance, the full complexity, but it does let us compare candidates on a common, transparent basis.
So they're being clear about what the tool can and, importantly, cannot do.
Exactly. Which is fundamental for scientific integrity,
Okay, critique number 2. The timeline. People felt it was just too short, not enough time for a deep dive, ironically.
Yeah, that the analysis felt rushed.
How did they handle that one?
Yeah.
Because that seems harder to defend.
Well, this is where it gets interesting. They actually agreed with the critique.
They did.
They admitted a longer period, maybe started much earlier in the election cycle, would absolutely have allowed for deeper analysis. And quite generously, I thought, they added that more time might have even given the candidates a chance to look at the analysis and maybe tweak their own proposals.
Wow, that sounds like owning a real limitation.
Yeah.
But they framed it as a moral commitment. Is that just spin?
You could see it that way, or you could see it as, okay, lesson learned for the long-term project. They're pledging to extend the timeline next time and to broaden the analysis beyond just economics.
So they're signaling they heard the feedback on scope 2.
Seems like it.
Which brings us to that scope issue.
Yeah.
The coordinator admitted they perhaps didn't justify their specific scientific angle well enough, that heavy focus on economics.
Yes, exactly. They acknowledged they needed to better explain the analytical grid itself and the inherent limits of relying so much on economic factors.
Because a lot of it rests on that ceteris paribus idea, right? All else being equal.
Precisely. And in politics, assuming all else is equal is Well, it's a huge assumption.
How so? What's the risk?
The risk is you underestimate the stuff that really makes programs work or fail. Things like, institutional quality. Is the justice system fair? How deep does corruption run?
If you assume those are static, you miss the real drivers.
You got it. So they're now committing to bringing those broader dimensions in more explicitly in the future.
But they did defend the initial economic focus.
They did, framing it as pretty standard practice in political economy. They mentioned pioneers like Stigler and Norhaus from the 70s, political economic cycles, that sort of thing.
And they gave an example.
Yeah, they pointed to how economists costed the common program of the left in France before the 81 election, basically saying, look, this kind of analysis isn't new, it's a tool that gets used.
Okay, so method critiques acknowledged, some defenses offered. Now let's move into the really thorny area. The accusations of political bias.
Right, stepping into the political crossfire.
The most direct hit was the claim that the director, Professor Viviane Biolay, was somehow affiliated with the ruling party and that this tainted the whole thing.
The political affiliation charge?
How did the GPE respond to that? That's personal and potentially damaging.
Oh, their response was strong, immediate, and quite forceful. They called it inference of intent, even intellectual terrorism.
Strong words. What was their actual offense?
It was sort of a three-part defense. First, the affiliation claim itself, unproven. Second, even if she had personal opinions, attacking those denies her right to scientific expression.
Yep.
And third, and this is crucial for the institution, they drew a very clear line. The director provided administrative oversight only. The scientific team, they insisted, worked with complete independence and in good faith.
Separating management from the actual research.
That was the firewall they put up.
All right, let's tackle the second big bias critique.
Yeah.
This one was maybe more subtle, more about the framework itself. The idea that the analysis inherently favored continuity.
Yes, that it had a slight bias in favor of the status quo. Some even said it amounted to marketing the status quo.
This feels like the heart of the matter. If your method focuses purely on technical coherence, does it automatically give the existing system an edge?
That's the question, and the GPE pushed back hard against the idea. They just ignored the incumbent's actual track record. They pointed back to their own initial assessment.
The context and analysis framework section.
Exactly. They said, look at what we wrote there. It was highly critical.
Critical how? Did they provide evidence?
They did. They cited data from National Stats, the Regional Central Bank, INS, BEAC. They highlighted structural economic weaknesses, talked about the secondary sector losing momentum.
Okay.
And then the kicker, they actually described the current economic performance as impoverishing growth.
Wow. Impoverishing growth. That's definitely not marketing language for the status quo.
Not at all. They put it in historical context, too, comparing it negatively to the 7.5% average growth Cameroon saw back in 75 to 85.
And they looked at debt, too, right? Beyond just the simple ratio.
Yes, they didn't just stop at the official CMICAR get 40% of GDP, which the country meets on paper. They dug deeper.
What did they find?
They argued that if you look at the structure of the loans, the maturity dates, how the money is actually being used, it reveals significant vulnerabilities.
And they had proof.
They pointed to the rise in payment arrears, the RAP. Basically, the government delaying payments on its debts. That's a big red flag about fiscal health.
Okay, so RAP means payment arrears, a definite warning sign.
Correct. So the initial diagnosis of the economy presented in the report was, undeniably quite critical.
Which brings us right to the core tension, doesn't it? If the GPE's own starting analysis was that critical, using phrases like impoverishing growth, why did the final scoring still feel to many like it favored the incumbent? Why did it seem to uphold the status quo?
Exactly. This is where it gets really interesting and where they introduce this concept of the incumbent's premium.
The incumbent's premium. Okay, what is that?
Their argument is, this isn't about our political bias as researchers. It's about an objective bias built into the very nature of the contest.
How so?
The government already in power automatically has advantages. They have the whole state machinery, right? They have instant access to detailed, often proprietary data that challengers just can't get.
And international connections.
And established relationships with international bodies like the IMF, the World Bank, often tied to existing programs and conditionalities. All this makes their proposals look more coherent, more thoroughly costed, more feasible on paper.
So a challenger might have a brilliant transformative idea, but they just lack the bureaucratic infrastructure, the detailed stats, maybe the international nod to make it seem as technically sound in this kind of evaluation.
That's precisely the argument. This structural edge, the incumbent's premium, can make their programs score better in a technical assessment, even if the underlying economic reality, as the GPE themselves noted, is quite poor.
And did the GPE acknowledge this premium affected their scoring?
Yes, this is where they showed, I think, significant self-awareness. The coordinator admitted that while their initial critical assessment of the economy was in the report,
The impoverishing growth part.
right, its implications weren't fully carried through into the final overall scoring of the different programs.
So they identified the problem, but didn't let it sufficiently downgrade the incumbent score based on that reality. That's a big admission.
It is a serious analytical limit, and the coordinator took personal responsibility for it. They blamed it partly on the very short time frame. Again, not enough time to fully integrate those complex dynamics and nuances.
But they did offer some counter evidence to show the methodology wasn't completely skewed.
They did. They pointed towards the sectoral analysis,
Meaning?
looking at specific policy areas like economic governance or environmental plans or strategies for diversification.
And what did that show?
It showed that in many of those specific thematic areas, several competing candidates actually scored as well as or even better than the incumbent.
So the framework could identify strengths in challenger programs area by area.
That was their point. It wasn't a total wash for the status quo across the board.
Okay.
And just for clarity, they confirmed they used the government's official National Development Strategy 2030, the S&D 30, as the proxy for the ruling party's program.
Because that's the official plan they're supposed to be working from.
Exactly. It's their stated programmatic initiative.
Okay. So, wrapping this up, this whole episode, the evaluation, the criticism, the response, it really throws a spotlight on how incredibly hard it is to do rigorous academic work in a politically charged space, right?
Absolutely. Trying to translate that kind of detailed analysis into something the public can use quickly without getting instantly slammed for being biased, it's a minefield.
But the GPE did engage. They defended their independence, but also, importantly, they openly admitted some real limitations.
They owned up to the tight schedule, the need to maybe look beyond just pure economics next time, and crucially, that failure to fully connect the dots between their critical economic diagnosis and the final scores.
That kind of public accountability from an academic institution in this context is pretty significant.
I think so. They also expressed regret that the timing didn't allow candidates to actually use the analysis to improve their programs earlier. They thanked the university for the independence, but took full responsibility for the limits.
So what does this all mean for you listening?
Well, I think this whole situation, especially this idea of the incumbent's premium and the acknowledged limits of a purely economic or technical evaluation, it raises a big question.
Which is?
Given that these technical models might naturally undervalue things like institutional quality, rule of law, governance, what other ways, what non-economic questions should you as a citizen be asking? How do you test the real credibility, the long-term feasibility of a political program beyond just the costings?
But how do you measure genuine commitment?
Exactly. What evidence would convince you that a candidate is serious about, say, fighting corruption or strengthening institutions, even if their economic spreadsheet looks perfect? That's something to really chew on as you evaluate political promises.